George got me pregnant. Divorce me and get out of this house right now.
Sarah, who always looked down on me, is kneeling before me. I'm surprised by the sight, but her words are as arrogant as ever. She's pregnant with George's child, so she wants me to divorce and leave the house? The audacity of my sister to say such things, it almost brings up the old hatred I have for her. But, managing to keep those feelings in check, I agreed to her demand.
Fine, here's the divorce paper. I'm only taking our youngest son with me.
Saying this, I head to the room where my youngest son is. I don't want to stay in this house a second longer. I find myself walking faster. However, Sarah calls out to me loudly, stopping me in my tracks.
What?
Take them all with you. I turn to look at Sarah, giving her a puzzled look.
Why should I? Just do it, okay?
She says with a flattering smile. I've been fooled by that smile so many times before. But not anymore. Looking straight at Sarah, I said.
No way, these kids are.
To that, Sarah looked utterly shocked. My name is Emily Johnson, I'm 32 years old, and currently a stay-at-home mom. I have a mean older sister, 3 years my senior. Her name is Sarah, and ever since I can remember, I've disliked her. Sarah was born with an illness and was hospitalized for a long time, but she got better after receiving a kidney transplant from our father. However, our parents were always concerned about Sarah's health and spoiled her. Sarah, for some reason, was jealous of me and enjoyed tormenting me out of our parents' sight.
You know, your name is so old-fashioned, while mine is cute. Maybe you're just not loved by our parents.
She used to say things like, "You're useless, just disappear," making me cry. Sometimes, she would look me up and down, sighing.
You really have bad style and are ugly. I'm glad I wasn't born like you.
When I was younger, I used to fight back or talk back to Sarah. But when she got angry, she became uncontrollable and violent towards things. So, gradually, I stopped responding and just did as she said. In high school, Sarah became more fashionable, getting flashier by the day. But she was terrible at cleaning her room. It was always messy, to the point of cockroaches appearing. I asked our parents to speak to Sarah about it, but they seemed reluctant to upset her and did nothing.
She'll clean it eventually,
Mom said, casually killing a cockroach and throwing it in the trash. Meanwhile, Sarah would be in the living room, watching videos loudly and laughing obnoxiously. Skilled at flattering teachers, Sarah barely managed to graduate despite her poor grades. After that, she didn't get a job and lazed around at home until a senior introduced her to a job in the nightlife industry. She started dating that senior and moved out to live with him. Around that time, I graduated from nursing school and got a job, moving out of the house. After working as a nurse for nearly 10 years, I met the man who would become my husband at the same hospital. He was a doctor who had just joined our hospital, a man with a kind smile. His name was George Johnson, and he was 8 years older than me. I quickly grew close to him, whom I had always thought of as a mature man, when his youngest child, Lily, was admitted to my department. Lily was the youngest of 3 children he had with his late wife. She was admitted with gastroenteritis and severe dehydration. As her assigned nurse, I grew closer to her through our daily conversations. And since George visited her every day, I naturally got closer to him too. We hit it off, and I admired how he juggled being a single father despite his busy schedule. Eventually, we started dating, and he introduced me to his other children. Let me introduce you. This is the eldest, Jake, a freshman in high school. Then there's Max, a 6th grader. And you know Lily, right? We all exchanged greetings. And I was impressed by how well-mannered and nicely dressed they were. Once, when we all went out for a meal, I asked George,
"Isn't it tough taking care of the kids all by yourself?"
He replied with a casual nod.
Max and Lily are still in elementary school, but they go to after-school care, and my mom helps out at home. My dad does the school runs for Jake's tutoring. I'm really not doing much. I'm very grateful to my parents.
Later, I became pregnant with George's child and we decided to get married. I met his parents formally, but I didn't want to see my sister Sarah's face, so I just informed her by email. At that time, Sarah had broken up with the man who led her to move out and was dating someone she met at work. Sarah has a tendency to be overly dependent on her romantic relationships. When she's into a guy, she loses all interest in me and the rest of the family. She didn't even bother to reply to my email. She barely made it to the wedding, yawning and looking bored the whole time, showing no sign of wanting to celebrate. But once married, I hardly ever saw Sarah anyway. I was enjoying my newlywed life with George. However, becoming a mother to 3 children overnight was overwhelming, and I struggled with the unfamiliar household chores. This led to a risk of preterm labor, and the doctor ordered me to be on complete bed rest. Seeing my struggle, George seriously suggested,
Another one is on the way. Would you consider quitting your job and focusing on home and the kids?
I loved my job and was torn, but I ultimately decided to quit nursing and become a full-time homemaker. We welcomed a baby boy, the 4th son of the Johnson family. We named him Tyler. Raising newborn Tyler was challenging yet incredibly fulfilling. I think those were truly happy days. However, it seemed George wasn't pleased with my attention being solely on Tyler. He often said, "Pay more attention to me."
I'm sorry, but I'm really busy with Tyler right now.
As I kept saying this, it seemed George became sulky. Gradually, he started coming home late. And sometimes didn't return until morning, which worried me. When I asked about it, George replied with a forced smile, "We're short-staffed at work, it's really busy." George isn't good at lying. So, I started suspecting he might be having an affair. Just then, Sarah unexpectedly visited.
Sarah, this is a surprise. What's up?
She didn't answer and just barged in.
Wow, not working and yet living in such a nice house?
Must be nice, huh? Sarah seemed to misunderstand that being a homemaker is easy, but managing a household and raising children is far from simple.
How about you, Sarah? I heard you broke up with that guy?
Broken up? Oh, that leech? Yeah, but I'm seeing someone else now. She looked smug as she told me this. I couldn't help but be amazed at her ability to move on so quickly. But that's her only talent, I guess. I just responded with a ending the conversation. But Sarah persisted.
Aren't you curious about who I'm dating? Not really. It's your life, Sarah. You can date whoever you want.
Sarah's choices in men always seem to be based on looks, without much else to offer. I figured this time would be no different.
This one's different, very kind.
She said, even though I hadn't asked. Really? I replied nonchalantly, which seemed to irritate Sarah. Hey, Emily, are you even listening to me?
That's what I'm saying. Whatever type of guy it is, if it's good for you, Sarah, then it's fine.
So you'd bless any relationship I'm in?
Well, if you're happy, then yeah.
When I said that, Sarah looked me straight in the face and said, "Don't forget that, okay?" I was taken aback by her intensity and just nodded in agreement. She smirked. "That's right, you always did what I wanted. Well, I'm leaving now."
What? You're leaving already?
Yeah, I'm done here. Oh, and I'll borrow this bag. Sarah picked up my white designer bag that was in the living room.
Borrow it? You never return anything you borrow.
As I protested, Sarah started emptying everything from my bag onto the floor, saying, "Don't defy me, Emily, you're just a plain Jane. See you later." And with that, she left. A few days later, George's infidelity came to light. I found a woman's lipstick mark on his shirt, blatantly evidencing a kiss. I thought it was such a cliché way for an affair to be exposed, but I was ready to forgive him if he apologized. However, when I confronted him, George looked somber and said, "I'm sorry. I really regret what I've done to you. I was planning to talk to you about it soon." Talk about what? He just kept repeating, "Sorry, sorry," and then began making a phone call.
Yeah, it's me. Emily found out. Can you come over now?
I was in disbelief, watching him invite his mistress over right in front of me.
What? You're calling her over now? She's coming here?
I was infuriated that he'd do this without my consent. George just kept bowing and repeating, "I'm really sorry, so sorry." Then, less than an hour later, our doorbell rang. I was shocked to see who was on the intercom.
Sarah!
This can't be true. Why is Sarah here? I was stunned as George opened the door. And there stood Sarah, more serious than I'd ever seen her. Suddenly, right in front of me, she began to apologize.
I'm pregnant with George's baby. Divorce him and leave this house right now.
Sarah, who always looked down on me, was apologizing right in front of me. I was shocked by the sight, but her words were typical of her, arrogant to the extreme. She's pregnant with George's child. And wants me to divorce and leave the house?
How dare you come here and say that? Do you think just showing up and saying this will make it all work out?
When I yelled, George also started apologizing along with her.
Please! Just as you heard, do it for us, Emily. I can't believe it. Why of all people, Sarah?
As I said this, George looked down and began to explain.
Actually, I bumped into Sarah on my way back from work one day. She was on her way to her job and invited me for a drink. I had just gone through a breakup at that time, and George was so kind and comforting. That's how I started falling for him.
Despite being in my presence, Sarah talked as if she was gushing over a new love, which disgusted me. That's when,
Dad?
I heard Lily's voice and turned around to see all 3 kids gathered around us. Tyler was 2 years old and sleeping in the bedroom. I realized I couldn't let the children witness any more of this drama and decided.
All right, fine. Here's the divorce papers. I'm only taking Tyler with me.
Saying that, I headed to Tyler's room. In fact, since I started suspecting George of infidelity, I had already gotten the divorce papers from the office and signed them myself. I never thought I'd need to use them so soon. But I had no regrets. I didn't want to stay in this house a second longer, my steps quickened naturally. But then Sarah called out to me loudly.
What?
Take them all with you. I turned back to look at her with a puzzled expression.
Why?
Just because. It's fine, isn't it? She said with a flattering smile. I had been fooled by that smile so many times. But not anymore.
Impossible, these kids.
What? I looked straight at Sarah and said.
Because these kids are just like you, Sarah.
What? Sarah let out a dumbfounded sound. How? How are they like me?
Their faces are completely different. It's not about the faces. It's their personalities. They're similar to you, so they'll probably get along fine.
By then. As I was about to leave, Sarah tried to stop me.
Wait, are you seriously going to leave them? Didn't you say you wished me happiness?
George stepped in to calm her down.
Let it be, Sarah. After all, the 3 kids are mine, and they're not blood related to Emily. It's only right that we take them.
Hearing George say that, Sarah's face contorted.
But, don't worry, they're all great kids. They'll get along fine with Sarah.
George said, smiling. I thought to myself, he has no idea. After that, the divorce with George was settled smoothly. All 3 kids went to live with George, and Sarah suddenly became the mother of 3. I left with only Tyler, deciding to return to my nursing career. It was hard to leave 2-year-old Tyler, but I had no choice. I enrolled him in daycare. Of course, I worked at a different hospital than George. I was busy but living a happy life. About 3 months later, George showed up at the apartment where Tyler and I lived. When I opened the door, there was George, looking completely worn out.
Emily. Oh, what have I done? I really regret everything.
Seeing George so flustered like I'd never seen before, I urged him to come inside. After I made some tea, George started crying as soon as he took a sip.
What's wrong? Did something happen?
As I asked, George wiped his tears with his sleeve and said,
No, I'm sorry. It's been so long since someone made tea for me. Sarah, she can't cook at all, and she doesn't even clean up.
He sighed as he said this. I thought to myself, that sounds about right. Sarah never helped with any chores when we were at our parents' house. She never cleaned her room. She used to live in a room so dirty that bugs would infest it.
So, Sarah doesn't do any housework even after marrying you?
When I asked, George nodded.
Yeah, maybe it's because she's pregnant, but even after the morning sickness ended, she just lies around the house all day and doesn't do any housework. Meanwhile, the house has turned into a mess, bugs everywhere, cockroaches breeding, it's a disaster.
I wasn't surprised. And it wasn't just Sarah's fault. George seemed unaware, but all 3 of his children were also terrible at tidying up. Especially the second son, Max, was worse than Sarah, a genius at making a mess. When I was George's wife, I used to clean Max's room diligently, but he would mess it up in a day. I was amazed at how quickly he could scatter things around, cleaning up his snack wrappers.
The house is getting more and more neglected, and Sarah doesn't cook at all.
George continued, exhausted.
Breakfast is just some pastry, dinner is store-bought side dishes. That lifestyle doesn't suit me. I've always been used to homemade meals, and I can't take it anymore.
I can imagine, I said to George, feeling exasperated. He didn't realize how privileged he had been. He said quietly,
I mistakenly thought all women were good at housework and childcare. That's a stereotype.
George nodded, looking dejected. Then the doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there was Sarah.
Well.
With a large belly, likely close to giving birth, Sarah looked timid. But as soon as she saw men's shoes in the entryway, she became furious.
Wait, is George here?
Sarah stormed into the room, looking furious. George, seeing Sarah, was startled and hid in a corner of the room.
Why are you at Emily's house? Is this an affair?
I calmed down the angry Sarah.
Of course not. George just showed up unexpectedly a while ago. So, what brings you here, Sarah?
I asked, and Sarah turned to look at me.
Since George is here, it's perfect. I came to ask Emily for a favor.
The word favor gave me a bad feeling.
Listen, Emily, can you please take the kids? I feel like I'm going to have a nervous breakdown if things continue this way.
Sarah looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She always cared about her appearance, but now she seemed too stressed to bother with makeup or her hair. Hearing Sarah's words, George looked shocked. But she didn't notice and pressed on.
I had no idea those kids would be so unruly. I just can't live with them anymore. It's like living in hell. What are you saying? Those kids are great. To criticize them like this is crazy.
George argued back, but Sarah just shook her head silently.
You have no idea what kind of people they are,
she said in a low, suppressed voice. That's when I chimed in.
That's what I said, didn't I? They're just like you, Sarah.
At my words, Sarah glared at me fiercely.
How are they like me? Those kids, I mean.
Sarah started to explain. Initially, when she was introduced to the kids, she thought they were nice and that she could get along with them. However, they only acted well in front of George and showed their true colors when he was gone. The eldest son, now a high school sophomore, never greeted Sarah and always watched videos. When he returned from school, he would bring a bunch of rowdy friends, raid the fridge and kitchen cabinets, taking snacks and drinks, and make a lot of noise in his room.
It was hell when I had severe morning sickness. They finally left, but then he would watch videos at a high volume in the living room and laugh loudly. The worst part was, I couldn't say anything because when I did, he would glare at me so menacingly I was afraid of what he might do.
That's exactly what you used to do at home, Sarah. I told her, and although she glared at me, I could tell she knew it was true.
You always watched videos at a high volume in the living room, ignoring everyone else. And if anyone said anything, you would throw things. Our family always had to endure it, remember?
As I said this, Sarah was speechless but then started to speak again.
That's not all. Lily is really terrible too.
George looked at her in surprise.
Lily? That's impossible. What are you talking about now?
I urged her to continue amidst the tense atmosphere. Sarah said,
That girl, she's really sneaky, like she steals my stuff. I can't believe it.
Sarah recounted in disbelief. How Lily, in 5th grade and becoming interested in fashion, would take Sarah's jewelry and expensive bags without returning them.
Just the other day, she took my Tiffany necklace and sold it online. Can you believe it?
Is that true? If it was indeed terrible.
It's true. I recognized the necklace and saw other items of mine being sold online. I knew right away it was Lily's doing.
I see. I said gravely, but truthfully, I already knew about Lily's behavior. Lily, seemingly charming and adorable, shared Sarah's trait of taking things without returning them. I had repeatedly tried to correct her behavior, but I couldn't manage to fix it while I was her mother. I thought that since she was the youngest, perhaps with persistent effort, she might change. But then, during that time, Sarah took George away from me, and we ended up getting divorced, so it was impossible.
But you know, Sarah, that's exactly what you used to do to me.
I told her, and she exclaimed.
Me? I never did such a thing. What are you talking about?
Sarah tried to deny it, but I silently pointed to the white bag she had with her.
That bag. You said you were borrowing it from me and just took it, right? Sarah looked shocked, staring at the bag she was holding. George also looked puzzled. Yeah, that bag. I thought it looked exactly like the brand name bag I gifted to Emily. I thought I was imagining things, but did you steal it from her, Sarah? Sarah, visibly shaken, replied. What? No way. I bought this myself. Where from? Well, I think it was from Neiman Marcus in New York, maybe? George glared at her as she spoke. That brand doesn't have a presence in the United States. A friend's wife brought it back for me as a souvenir from her shopping trip in Europe. Confronted with this, Sarah fell silent. See? What you're experiencing now, Sarah, is just what you used to do to us. Always focused on your appearance, laughing loudly while watching videos, and leaving garbage everywhere for us to pick up. When the room was so dirty that trash overflowed, Mom would clean it up without a word. And even then, you'd yell at her for cleaning up your mess. That's really low, you know. As I said this, Sarah trembled with clenched fists, glaring at me silently. George then said to her, Sarah, our 3 kids aren't like that. Sarah looked at George with a face full of disbelief. How can you say such things about such good kids? Don't you feel sorry for them? They're still children. Sarah seemed astounded by George's ignorance. You're the one who doesn't understand, George. All the housework and childcare to me. Those kids only behave in front of you because they don't want to be abandoned. On this point, I actually agreed with Sarah. The kids only showed their good side to George. And George was part of the problem. He never really took care of the children, leaving everything to his wife or parents. George sighed and shook his head. I used to think that no matter how messy the house was or if we had ready-made meals, it would get better with time. But when it came to the kids, George said with a serious expression, I can't overlook you speaking ill of the kids. They're treasures to me. I've lost all faith in you. Wait. Please believe me, George. However, George couldn't bring himself to believe her. You're a terrible person. I've truly lost all love for you, he stated firmly, looking at Emily. Now that I've lost you, I realize how wonderful you were. I want to punch myself for falling for such a terrible woman, he added, ignoring Sarah. Terrible woman? Sarah exclaimed. Ignoring her outburst, George continued to speak to Emily. Emily, could we start over, you, me, and the kids? Upon hearing this, Emily couldn't help but snort. No way, that's impossible. You say you love your kids, but you never really took care of them. I was the one who looked after them while we were married. And when I was busy with newborn Tyler, you sulked because I couldn't give you attention. And then you cheated on me with my sister. That's the lowest of the low. George was left speechless. Sorry, but please don't come back here. When I said this, George hung his head in silence. Sarah, who had witnessed George proposing to me, couldn't believe it. It might have been the first time she felt like she had lost to me. In a fit of rage, she said to George, Wait a minute. You think a plain woman like Emily is better than me? How much more do you need to insult me? George snapped back. Silence. Emily is not plain. You're the one who's truly ugly. With those words, he left their house. Sarah collapsed, seemingly overwhelmed. Soon after, I heard that George and Sarah divorced. George took custody of their 3 kids and was raising them with the help of his parents. What was surprising was Sarah. Sarah seemed to have genuinely fallen for George, and it appeared she couldn't recover from the heartache. Until then, Sarah had only cared about looks, but it seemed she had fallen for George's warm personality despite his plain face. Even after George broke up with her, she couldn't forget his kindness, and Sarah became obsessed with him. Every day, she would go to George's house and ring the doorbell, leading to the police reporting her as a stalker. Despite that, Sarah continued to repeat her actions, and she was eventually apprehended by the police. Currently, it seems that the child Sarah gave birth to is being raised by her parents. As for me, Tyler has turned 3, and he's getting cuter day by day. My nursing job is going smoothly, and I enjoy every day. Recently, a male patient I was taking care of for a long time was discharged. He had been battling illness for a long time, so the day of his discharge was quite emotional. As he was leaving, he invited me, Would you like to go for tea sometime?
Dating or getting married was out of the question, but I agreed to occasional meetings, and we enjoy talking to each other. It's a way to unwind, and the distance is just right for me. From now on, I want to increase the happy moments in my life. That's how I feel these days.